welcome everyone. This is the first episode of the Burgess Podcast. This podcast is aimed to kind of inspire young rugby players. And today I'm lucky to be joined by a very talented rugby player by the name of James Marshall. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, firstly, thanks for having me on. Love being on the debut podcast. Pretty special. But yeah, I'm James Marshall. I was born in Auckland, New Zealand. Grew up in Nelson, New Zealand. And I've been playing professional rugby for the last sort of 12 years throughout the world. And yeah, looking forward to talking about that journey with you on this.
Definitely. So how's things been going for you recently? You had hip surgery 5 months ago now. How's that been for you?
Yeah, it's been a slow, gradual process. It still caused me a fair bit of grief, the hip, but still have about 6-7 months till I'm expected to be back available to play. Whether I go down the playing route or not, I'm not too sure yet. Just going to see how it goes, but yeah, it's still not feeling that good. All
them years of rugby are starting to take its toll on the body, I can imagine.
It does, eh? It's a brutal game, especially when you're a little man like I was, or I am.
I mean, I've been playing since I was 8, and I couldn't hack it. I've had to retire at 17, so you've done much better than me, put it that way.
How come you had to retire?
So I unfortunately, a couple of years ago now, I had a series of concussions. I was playing at London Irish. I was playing for Berkshire in school, and all different physios. And I didn't know the correct protocol at the time. So I had a concussion for school, then gone London Irish, played, had a concussion there. And it just kind of spiraled out of control until I went and played a bit of football, headed of football, knocked me clean out. And that was kind of an indication to me that something's not right up there. So I decided to pack it in there because a bit more to life than just rugby, unfortunately.
Fair enough, yeah.
So taking you back to when you were a youngster, how did rugby start for you? How did it come about?
Obviously rugby is a pretty big sport in New Zealand. I always loved watching it. I was massive rugby fan. I remember my parents taking me down to the local rugby ground in Auckland. I was 5 years old, my brother was 3, and we went down for our first sort of rugby hit out, but I didn't enjoy it, so I changed to soccer. So did my brother. But then when we moved down to Nelson when I was 8, all my friends were playing rugby down there, so I decided to switch back and start playing it because they were pretty much, and then my brother followed suit as well. So
very good. So you went to Nelson College, I'm right in saying. How were your years there?
Yeah, Nelson College was awesome for me. That was when I first pretty much really decided that I wanted to give professional rugby a crack. There was a sort of turning point when I missed out on the under 16 side, the college side, and I'd been telling people that I wanted to be a professional rugby player, but when I realised that I couldn't actually make that team and I wasn't even one of the best 26 players in my school, made me realise that I had to do something. So from that point I sort of sat down, set some goals, and just made a commitment that I wanted to go hard for the next 2 years, and if I wasn't in the first 15 by the end of my school, then I would give up on my rugby dream. Every time I sacrificed something, all the more effort I put in, more things started to come.
I think that's a great point, especially for the young people watching. Like, getting to the top or getting to where you want to be is never going to be a straight line. There's going to be adversity along the way, and I think that's a good point to show that you just can't give up because you're not always going to make the team. So you've got to be working hard, 100%.
Yeah, 100%. There's no smooth rugby journey. That's for sure. There's always going to be adversity, like you say. So the way you handle those moments throughout your career, whether it's early or in a professional environment, is going to be massive for your career.
100%. And also, it's them situations that inevitably will probably make you stronger. Because if you're that big kid that's always getting selected for your team, it's quite easy to go, oh, this is easy, and you probably won't work as hard, which probably is the case for a lot of people that are very good at an early age.
Yeah, you see it all the time with kids coming through, the ones who haven't had to sacrifice anything, or it's just all sort of come too easy. When things start getting hard, they're usually the first ones to start folding, but the ones who had to make heaps of sacrifices to get to where they want, and they just sort of grew that determination as they built their rugby career. They're the ones who you see just keep going and sort of have those longer careers.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of moving into the beginning of your professional career now, you made your debut for Tasman against Bay of Plenties in 2008. What was it like? What was it like to make your debut? I'm sure that was a pretty special feeling.
Yeah, it was. It was my second year out of school, and Tasman was always a dream to sort of, once they only became a professional side sort of 2 or 3 years earlier. So the pathway was there for me if I wanted to take it. And my first start, I was on the bench. I only came on for the last 5 minutes. Dropped the high ball.
That's always going to be the case, isn't it?
From the game. It was a wet game, and I just remember I was sitting on the bench like, I don't think I'm going to get on today, but because it was quite a close game. And anyway, they got me on with the last 5 minutes, dropped the ball, and that was the debut.
What a debut to remember, eh? So moving into the beginning of 2019 season, you got quite a bad ankle injury, am I right in saying, which had you out for a good amount of the season?
Yeah, so that was that first season I played, I only came off the bench that whole year. I didn't get any starts, but the following year, 2009, I had my first start in the first game. I was named as the 10 to start for the season, and was really excited about the opportunity. But 20 minutes into that game, I rolled my ankle and had to come off, and I was going quite good up until that 20 minutes. So I was pretty gutted about that.
Imagine, yeah.
And I ended up missing most of that season because I had to have surgery on it. But I managed to come back for the last few games, but it was never quite right.
So obviously you trained so hard to get to that point where you get that starting jersey. What advice could you give to people watching that get a long-term injury after working so hard? How do you mentally stay in the game and stay strong after something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's something that I didn't handle that well at that time. When I was young, I initially felt sorry for myself. Oh, why me? This was my opportunity. I was too busy feeling sorry for myself. But later on in life, throughout my career, I realised that these injury gaps that you have are huge opportunities to grow as a player. So whenever you get injured, don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as an opportunity to become a better player. Like, what am I not good at? What can I work on in this time that I'm injured, whether it's 1 week or 9 months, that I can come back at the end of this injury and be a better player than I was before I was injured.
100%. I think that is very valuable for especially youngsters. Like for me, myself, when I got my injuries, my concussions, I felt very sorry for myself, and I was like, oh, why me? But everything happens for a reason, I believe, and there's always going to be a silver lining, and you move on to bigger and better things, whether that's in rugby or outside of rugby. So in 2010, you got the opportunity to move to Italy on a 6-month contract. How was that? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I missed the Super Rugby. I was sort of hoping to get picked up by a Super Rugby side, but nothing eventuated there. So I just got a random Facebook message from someone saying that there was a spot at Ironi for a 10 if I was interested. So I hit up my agent, and he said, yes, there is. If you want to go there, you'll have to go next week or something. So it all happened pretty quick. It was my girlfriend at the time. We'd been together for about 2 months. She's now my wife. She came over with me, and we just...
What beginning to the journey?
Yeah, it was like a make or break situation. It was like, we're either going to be together for life, or you'll be flying back to Nelson from Italy probably. So it was a crazy experience.
What was the rugby like over in Italy? I'm sure it was a lot different to what you've been playing in New Zealand. So how did the styles differ?
Oh, the hardest thing for me in Italy was the language barrier.
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, as a 10, young 10, I still had heaps to learn at this point. I was a pretty loose styled 10. I like to attack from everywhere, which wasn't really the Italian Italian forward pack go anyway. The backs didn't mind it, but the forward pack used to give me a good Italian spray whenever I'd quick tap or see some space, which didn't quite come off. But it was the language thing for me, which I really struggled with.
Did you manage to pick up any Italian? Can you speak any now or not? Is it?
Nah.
No. I definitely couldn't learn the language.
Yeah, I learned all the calls, obviously, which were in Italian, but they were just words. I don't know what they mean.
No. Yeah, they just get you by to get on the rugby pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving more to the back end of 2012, you got your big move to the Hurricanes. How was that? Obviously, Hurricanes being a big club, having some famous players. How was that? That must have been a very, very special feeling.
Yeah, that was awesome because growing up, I was always obsessed with the Hurricanes. I was obsessed with Christian Cullen. He was my favourite player growing up, and I used to cop a fair bit of flack about being a Hurricanes fan because living in Nelson, everyone was sort of Crusader fans. So all my schoolmates and stuff used to give me a pretty hard time. So to become a Hurricane and to put the 15 jersey on like Christian Cullen used to wear was all pretty special. And I still had to pinch myself throughout my career that I was in that situation.
I can imagine you're playing with some very big players. And when you joined, you were obviously training alongside who is arguably now one of the best players in the world, Bowden Barrett. What was it like to train alongside someone of his quality?
Yeah, mate, we sort of started at the same time. I think his year was the first year that I was in the side, and he was just a young kid. He would have been about 20 or 19 or 20, and he was just, the boys called him Golden One because he was just that gifted. Like everything seemed to work out for him. Like he'd always get the bounce of the ball. He'd always get.
There's always that one.
He could just do anything that he wanted pretty much. But it looks like luck, but he's just got really good anticipation. His speed is next level. He can get himself in situations that other people can't. So, I love playing with Bodie. When he was at 10 and I was at 15, I think that was some of the best rugby that I played, and that was a lot of that was to do with him and the way we sort of bounced off each other and things. He was awesome to play with.
What was the intensity like at Hurricanes? It's obviously been playing for different sides before that, but did it feel like there was a step up when you went to the Hurricanes, or was it pretty similar to the other teams you played with?
Oh, it was definitely a step up, and a lot of it's just around the calibre of players. You walk in there and most of the guys were All Blacks, and just the intensity of trainings and stuff, and the opportunity when I got my first opportunity to play.
The competition for the shirt must have been intense, and that must have progressed you as a player immensely.
Yeah, you see how hard these guys are working, and it just pushes you. And it took me a while to get an opportunity, and I remember battling away for a few years, just wanting a crack. And I remember getting my first crack and had a start against the Highlanders, and following it didn't actually go that well. I dropped a few balls again.
These debuts aren't going well, are they?
No, there's a bit of a theme there. I never really thought about that until now. But the following week, I was dropped, and I remember thinking, man, I missed my opportunity there. But kept chipping away, and eventually got another crack, and managed to do a bit better that time.
Definitely. So moving on to around 2016 time now, you got the move to London Irish, which I must say is probably the best decision of your career as a London Irish fan. How did that come about? I heard from your podcast a few things. If you want to share how that all came about, and obviously London Irish got relegated the season you were meant to join. So how did that impact your decision?
Yeah, so I signed pretty early on. Clark Laidlaw, who was at the Hurricanes 2015, the year that we lost the final. He moved over to London Irish, and I remember talking to him before I left, saying that I was looking overseas, and he said he'd be keen to get me over. And we sort of kept talking at the start of 2016, and then ended up signing pretty early in that season. And then obviously a lot of things changed from when I signed to when I eventually got over there. The side got relegated. Hurricanes won the Super Rugby. A couple of the coaches left. Actually, two of the coaches who were a big part of getting me over there, had left. So it all changed pretty dramatically, and I ended up calling because the Hurricanes after the final said that they would match my London Irish contract. So I ended up calling up the CEO, Bob Casey, at the time and telling him that I'm not coming. So
big Bob Casey, that's a big call, isn't it?
It was a big call. I haven't been that nervous before a phone call in my life. I remember I was just like sweating. I remember him texting me saying he's free now. I was like, oh shit, here we go.
This is the moment.
I was just going to go down. Yeah, this is the moment. But yeah, anyway, he pretty much just said there's no chance I'm not going. So I was on the flight the next week and we were all good.
I can imagine when you met him, you probably were rather nice to him. He's quite an intimidating bloke, isn't he? He's not small.
Yeah, but he's such a friendly bloke too.
Yeah,
he wasn't really what I was expecting. I didn't know much about him. He was a lot younger than I pictured in my mind, and a lot friendlier than I was picturing as well. So we never spoke about it. So it was all good.
That's good. Well, dare I ask, how did your debut go for London Irish?
Debut. I remember it was because it was not soon after the Super Rugby final. So I remember it was at Bedford. I don't know if you've played at the Bedford field, but massive slope, and I just remember thinking, oh wow, like come from a Super Rugby final to
this,
the slopiest ground I've ever seen playing in Championship Rugby. I remember thinking, oh wow, and I was just getting peppered with high balls from the different style. There's so many box kick contestables that I had to take, and I was just copying a battering.
So what was it like for you, obviously coming from the highs of Super Rugby to not necessarily the lows of Championship Rugby, but it's definitely not the level of top tier Super Rugby. So how was that for you? Was there a noticeable difference for you?
Yeah, more so in the styles. Obviously, the crowds and stuff is just like there was pretty much no crowds. There wasn't, and the grounds and stuff were all not. Yeah, they weren't Super Rugby stadiums. Let's put it that way. So I just remember rocking up, and some of the games felt like New Zealand club games, and you're just like, well, how am I getting paid to be playing in this competition? But it was all for the bigger goal to get us back into the Premiership, which thankfully I got to experience the year after, and that was awesome.
100%. And obviously, you mentioned London Irish are notoriously kind of a big club in English rugby. So was there that element of pressure within the team in their championship to get promotion that season, or was it you just take every game as it comes?
Yeah, obviously the goal was to be promoted, but we did try and keep it as a game by game case. But I remember the guys talking about how much it meant and all that stuff, which did add a little bit of pressure. But to be honest, I never really felt like we weren't going to win that thing. I felt like we were a lot better side than anyone else. So I was always pretty confident that we would go back up once we'd got through the year. The finals ended up being a little bit closer than I expected, but I think we're always pretty safe.
Yeah, so London Irish have been in that kind of in-between stage for the last couple of seasons. They're definitely not championship level, but they're always in a bit of a relegation spat in the Premiership. So how was it for you to be in a relegation fight with London Irish in the Premiership?
Yeah, that was tough. Like that was pretty much our goal, not to stay out of that. But just the level of rugby and that Premiership's quality, and week to week, there's like no easy game. So we lost a lot of games by small margins, and I don't know what that was down to, but the way we played, I just felt like we just weren't quite good enough to finish teams off. Seemed to be similar errors and mistakes. We weren't really learning that quickly, and then once you get in a rut of losing games, it's really hard to get out of them.
Yeah, you get caught in a bit of a downward spiral. I think that was definitely evident in that season. But one player that did make their name for themselves in that season was Joe Cokanasiga. What was it like to play alongside a young Joe Cokanasiga? Obviously, he's now an English international.
Yeah, I remember turning up and seeing him, and I think I was standing next to Clarkie, and he told me that he was 18 or something ridiculous, and I just didn't believe him. I was like, there's no way this kid's 18. He was massive, and I was like, obviously he had huge potential. He didn't get a huge amount of game time in that championship season. He had a couple of games, and every time he played, he just tore it up.
Well,
So,
there was that try against London Scottish. If you remember that try, that was just ridiculous. That is mental.
Yeah. I think that was pretty much when everyone realised that this kid's got a huge future, and it won't be too long before we see him in the international jersey.
Definitely. And of course he went to Bath like all the London Irish players do. Anthony Watson, Jonathan Joseph, they all end up at Bath, which is ridiculous. But anyway,
yeah. I remember talking to him after that, once we got relegated. And he said it was a real hard decision for him. He obviously wanted to play at the World Cup, so the move to Bath, it would have been hard to make England from playing in the Championship. So, mate, I think it was the right decision. As hard as it would have been.
100%.
London Irish fan, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So you then after London Irish, you went to Japan, didn't you? What was it like playing in Japan? Obviously, you've played in Europe and New Zealand, but Japan's a growing country for rugby. So how was it in Japan?
Yeah, so I'd actually signed 3 years with London Irish, but once we got relegated, I wasn't that keen to do the championship again. I'd experienced that, and I actually loved the year in the champ, but it wasn't something that that really motivated me to have another crack at.
Yeah, of course.
So the opportunity actually started at the Hurricanes to go back home. I made a call from John Plumtree and Chris Boyd, and they said that they were keen to get me back. And then the Japan opportunity came in between that, which just worked out perfectly. And as soon as I got that, it was a no-brainer for me to try and get out of my London Irish contract. Thankfully, Bob Casey had already left by then, so it wasn't.
So you didn't have to face him again. Yeah.
No, it was just went in and saw the coaches, and they understood, and they were all good about it.
So what was the level like in Japan? Because obviously you've got Championship rugby you've played Super Rugby. Where would Japan level fall in between that? Is it in between, or is it lower than Championship? What would you say?
So in Japan, it was an awesome experience. Obviously, the rugby was a bit different compared to the UK. Obviously, the UK, the focus is heavily on set piece, kick chase, that pressure game, whereas in Japan was very much just high speed, playing tempo, attacking brand, not much kicking, very little set piece focus, and very little kicking strategies. But in terms of lifestyle, we loved it there. There was so much downtime that we had in between trainings. So I had a lot of family time. We got to experience a lot of new places, and obviously the culture there. People are amazing, really friendly. Anyone who's been there would know, but it's a pretty special place to go visit if you haven't.
The Wi-Fi then decided to bail on us, but James still managed to answer a few questions. So I then asked him, what are your plans after rugby?
After rugby, I'm sort of going through that transition at the moment. Obviously, I've set up my podcast, which was my goal to just bang through that during this 9-month rehab that I'm doing. I'm also doing a little bit of coaching. So the back end of the Super Rugby season, I was coaching the Hurricanes when Carlos left, and also helping out with the Tasman market at the moment back here in Nelson. So there's a few opportunities opening up in that space, but I've moved around so much in my career that I don't really want to keep moving. So hoping there'll be a coaching opportunity that presents itself where the family settles down. So we'll just see what happens. Still got a little bit of time, hopefully, but we'll just play that by ear.
I then asked James if there was a possibility of him ever becoming the Hurricanes head coach in the future, and also that if he could give one piece of advice to young aspiring rugby players watching, what would it be?
If we were living in Wellington, 100%, I'd love to coach the Hurricanes. I've got a few decisions to make around that over the next few weeks, so we'll see what happens there. But obviously, it was a dream to play for them, but probably even more so to coach them. I always felt like I was a bit more of a coach than a player, especially going through school. I was never that talented player, but just loved the game, loved analysing footage and things like that. So I've always thought coaching was my calling, but like I said, I've moved around so much that, well, especially the family have as well with me. So felt like we've done that and don't want to really keep chasing that dream. So, but if it did happen, who knows? And one piece of advice, we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but be willing to make those sacrifices. It's not an easy road, but if you do become a professional rugby player, it is a hell of a lifestyle, but it's not easy. So I think the more sacrifices you make, especially coming into the rugby scene, the better. The less talented, probably the more sacrifices you'll have to make. But like we also touched on earlier, it'll only put you in a better stead going forward. And not only do the sacrifices make you a better player, so if you're sacrificing your sleep to get up early to go to the gym at 5 a.m, or whatever your sacrifice is, not only are you getting the benefit of that extra gym session, but you're also growing your will and your determination to achieve your goal of becoming a professional rugby player, because you don't want your sacrifices to go to waste. So that's one thing that I'd say to any young kid coming through: be willing to make sacrifices and work hard, enjoy it, and yeah, you can become it if you want it.
I then also asked James to shout out his podcast, which is What a Lad Podcast on Instagram, as I think it'd be a very beneficial listen for many of you young aspiring rugby players, as it does feature some very big names in the world of rugby.
Yeah, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's the What a Lad Podcast. Should be on any podcast platform. It's basically just me talking to some of the lads that I've met throughout my rugby journey. I'm always interested in hearing the journeys that people go through. Like I said earlier, there's no smooth rugby career, so there's always setbacks for players, and it's always interesting to see how people handle that, and also hear a few stories from what the lads get up to throughout their career. I've tried to make it as realistic. When players talk to the media, you don't really get that feel for what they're really like off the field, but having known a lot of them already, I feel like that's something that I've been able to do, is portray the player as what they're really like off the field, and you get to hear a little bit of their real personality, which is quite cool. So yeah, if you're keen to listen or follow the journey, I've got an Instagram page, What a Lad Instagram podcast, which jump on there, and if you've got any questions for me, feel free to shoot me a message.
We then wrapped the podcast up there, and it was very interesting hearing James's story and journey to the top of the game and the adversity he faced along the way. And I think that's something a lot of you young rugby players can take away, that it's never going to be a straight line to the top of the game. There's going to be adversity faced. You're not going to get selected for teams you want to get selected for, but it's the hard work that will inevitably be the difference. So always remember to work hard and just don't give up on your dream of becoming wherever you want to get in rugby, whether that's county, A-team in your club, or even professional. Just do not give up on the dream. And thank you again to James for giving his time up to talk to us today and give you an insight on his journey.
Sweet as, mate. Appreciate you having me on. Been a good yarn. Shame about the internet, but yeah, all good.